Well, good evening, folks, and welcome into this special edition of the David Paisano Show. Tonight, we're going to talk a little bit about what I call gold fever. And gold fever is this thing that happens to people that are involved in the treasure hunting community where they become so obsessed with the treasure hunt and they become so convinced that they're going to find a treasure that they disregard their own personal, um, let's say, fortune in order to find some other fortune. And so, what I'm going to do is I'm going to read a very old story and draw some parallels to it in hopes that I can assist the community in not becoming so obsessed with treasure hunts that it occupies their entire life for 17 years. And so let me start reading here a story called Acres of Diamonds. So I'm sharing the screen, and Acres of Diamonds is a fairly famous story. It came about from Russell Conwell's writings, and it eventually became the inspiration for the Temple University mission. And here's the famous story. And the speech was a little bit longer, but I'm just going to read part of it. In 1870, we went down the Tigris River. We hired a guide at Baghdad to show us Persepolis, Nineveh, and Babylon, and the ancient countries of Assyria as far as the Arabian Gulf. He was well acquainted with the land, but he was one of those guides who loved to entertain their patrons. He was like a barber that tells you many stories in order to keep your mind off the scratching and the scraping. He told me so many stories that I grew tired of his telling them and I refused to listen, looked away whenever he commenced. That made the guide quite angry. I remember that toward evening he took his Turkish cap off his head and swung it around in the air. The gesture I did not understand, and I did not dare look at him for fear I should become the victim of another story. But although I am not a woman, I did look, and the instant I turned my eyes upon that worthy guide, he was off again. Said he, I will tell you a story now, which I reserve for my particular friends. So then, counting myself as a particular friend, I listened, and I've always been glad I did. He said there once lived not from, excuse me, he said there once lived not far from the river Indus an ancient Persian by the name of Al-Hafed. He said that Al-Hafed owned a very large farm with orchards, grain fields, and gardens. He was a contented and wealthy man. Contented because he was wealthy, and wealthy because he was contented. One day, there visited this old farmer, one of those ancient Buddhist priests, and he sat down by Alafed's fire and told him that the old farmer how his world of ours was made. He said that this world was once a mere bank of fog, which is scientifically true, and he said that the Almighty thrust his fingers into the bank of fog and then began slowly to move his finger around and gradually to increase the speed of his finger until at last he whirled that bank of fog into a solid ball of fire. And it went rolling through the universe, burning its way through other cosmic banks of fog until it condensed the moisture without and fell in floods of rain upon the heated surface and cooled the outward crust. Then the eternal flames burst through the cooling crust and threw up the mountains and made the hills and the valleys of this wonderful world of ours. If this internal melted mass burst out and cooled very quickly, it became granite. That which cooled less quickly became silver, and less quickly gold. And after gold, diamonds were made, said the old priest. A diamond is a congealed drop of sunlight. This is a scientific truth also. You all know that a diamond is pure carbon actually deposited sunlight. And he said another thing I would not forget. He declared that a diamond is the last and highest of God's mineral creations, as a woman is the last and highest of God's animal creations. I suppose this is the reason why the two have such a liking of each other. And the old priest and the Alhafed that if he had a handful of diamonds, he could purchase a whole country. And with a mine of diamonds, he could place his children upon the thrones through the influence of their great wealth. Al-Hafed heard all about diamonds and how much they were worth, and went to his bed that night a poor man. Not that he had lost anything, but be poor because he was discontented, and discontented because he thought he was poor. He said, I want a mine of diamonds. So he lay awake all night, and early in the morning sought out the priest. Now, I know from experience that a priest, when awakened early in the morning, is cross. He woke that priest out of his dreams and said to him, Will you tell me where I can find diamonds? The priest said, Diamonds? What do you want with diamonds? I want to be immensely rich, said Al-Hafed, but I don't know where to go. Well, said the priest, if you will find a river that runs over white sand between high mountains, in those sands you will always see diamonds. Do you really believe that there is such a river? Plenty of them, plenty of them. All you have to do is just go and find them. Then you will have them. Al-Hafed said, I will go. So he sold his farm, collected his money, and left his family in charge of a neighbor. And away he went in search of diamonds. He began very properly, to my mind, at the mountains of the moon. Afterwards, he went around into Palestine, then wandered into Europe. And at last, when his money was all spent and he was in rags, wretched in poverty, he stood on the shore of that bay in Barcelona, Spain, when a tidal wave came rolling in through the pillars of Hercules, and the poor afflicted suffering man could not resist the awful temptation to cast himself into that incoming tide, and he sank beneath its foaming crest, never to rise in this life again. When that old guide had told me that very sad story, he stopped the camel I was riding and went back to fix the baggage on one of the other camels. And I remember thinking to myself, why did he reserve that for this particular friend? There seemed to be no beginning, middle, or end, nothing to it. That was the first story I ever heard told to read in which the hero was killed in the first chapter. I had but one chapter of that story, and the hero was dead. When the guide came back and took up the halter of my camel again, he went right on with the same story. He said that Al-Hafed's successor led his camel out into the garden to drink, and as the camel put its nose down in the clear water of the garden brook, Al-Hafed's successor noticed a curious flash of light from the sands of the shallow stream. And reaching in, he pulled out a black stone having an eye of light that reflected all the colors of the rainbow. And he took that curious pebble into the house and left it on the mantel, then went on his way and forgot all about it. A few days after that, the same old priest who told Al-Hafed how diamonds were made came in to visit the successor. When he saw that flash of light from the mantle, he rushed up and said, Here is a diamond! Here's a diamond! Has Al-Hafed returned? No, no. Al-Hafed has not returned, and that's not a diamond. That's nothing but a stone. We found it right out here in our garden. But I know a diamond when I see it, said he. That is a diamond. Then together they rushed to the garden and stirred up the white sands with fingers and found others more beautiful, more valuable diamonds than the first. And thus, said the guide to me, were discovered the diamond mines of Golconda, the most magnificent diamond mines in all the history of mankind, exceeding the Kimberley in its value. The great Kohinoor diamond in England's crown jewels and the largest crown diamond on earth and Russia's crown jewels, which had often hoped she would have to sell before they had peace with Japan, came from that mine. And when the old guide had called my attention to what wonderful discovery, he took his Turkish cap off again and swung it around in the air to call my attention to the moral. Those Arab guides have a moral to teach each story. Those Arab guides have a moral to each story, though the stories are not always moral. He said Alpha had remained at home and dug his own cellar in his own garden instead of wretchedness, starvation, poverty, and death in a strange land. He would have had acres of diamonds. For every acre, yes, every shovelful of that old farm afterwards revealed the gems which since have decorated the crowns of monarchs. When he had given this, uh, when he had given the moral to his story, I saw why he had reserved this story for his particular friends. I didn't tell him I could see it. I was not going to tell that old Arab that I could see it, for it was the mean old Arab's way of going around such a thing, like a lawyer, and saying indirectly what he did not dare say directly, that there was a certain young man that day traveling down the Tigris River that might better be at home in America. I didn't tell him. I could see it. And so the author goes on to tell more stories about people who did not appreciate what they had and went on fates to look for things and sought out things that other than what they had. And so, again, the main message of the story is to, if you're considering looking for someone's treasure and a treasure hunt, just remember that you can be a contented and wealthy man, contented because you're wealthy, and wealthy because you're contented. All right. Well, I don't know if anybody joined in tonight. Probably going to be a slow night. A lot of people are watching Calazars and some other shows. So anyway, turn that off. Looks like didn't have anybody join in tonight. So appreciate everybody that listened to this special message about treasure and treasure hunting and having a correct perspective on not getting yourself too involved in any specific treasure hunt. I've seen a few YouTubers this week who have seemed to cross over that line between a healthy hobby and an addiction, and I offer this as a warning. Thank you so much. Hope everybody has a great day.